On spare weekends, nights, during flights, Paul Collins carves out time whenever he can to write. Paul is a 30-year veteran of investment banking, but investing in children is the motivation behind his books.
Paul Collins is a first-generation American from Dublin, Ireland. An investment banker by day, he's a children's author in his spare time. Paul has always loved spinning a good yarn, as did his father. He uses stories to teach his own 3 kids important life lessons and family values. From those traditions came the idea to start Moonlight Puppies Press and to write a series of children's stories which inspire good choices, care for others, and gratitude.
Please welcome to the 700 Club, Paul Collins. Paul, it's so nice to have you with us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Will you talk a little bit about where your love of stories came from? I mean, long before the books came to be, you were telling stories.
Yeah, it started off with my dad. I'm Irish. You talk about the gift of the gab, but my dad used to tell us stories about growing up and so forth. And I shared a room with my younger brother, and he was always telling me to tell him stories. So at a young age, I sort of made up stories and told him stories. And when I had my own kids, it was the same thing. Dad, tell me a story. And I'd ask them about what, and they'd tell me about an eagle or a prince, and I'd encompass that with sort of family values. So I've always loved telling stories and doing trivia and humor with kids. So you'll see a lot of that going through the books as well.
Talk about what motivated you to write your very first storybook, Ellie the Eagle, the Rockefeller Christmas Tree.
Yeah, that's a great story. I'm sitting in my office here at home, and my daughter came in, my youngest daughter, and she's actually the character in the story. And she's saying, "Dad, can you write me a story about the eagle?" And it was right around Christmas time. And I kind of thought about what's the iconic image that one has of Christmas time in New York City is the Rockefeller Christmas tree. And with the American eagle and the Christmas tree, I put sort of one and one together, and it gave me the story. And, it's all about helping, friends helping each other, which feels like it's the Christmas spirit. So that's kind of what the background was to that story.
When you wrote Ellie the Eagle, did you have any idea that you would actually write a series of children's books?
It's one of those things where I wanted to write a couple of stories. And I sat down with some people, and my view was, what I'd like to do is really create a series of books that teach people family values, Christian values, moral compass. And what's sort of interesting is I've written 12 now, and now I'm just getting to the side of marketing them, because I think I wanted to have critical mass. So whether you had a daughter or a son or you had a book for everyone. And I wanted to get a series of books done before I really launched the program to sort of teach kids, the importance of family and values.
So you're having a lunch date with family and friends in Antigua. What happened, and how did that experience lead to the dragon's treasure?
It's a great story. I was sitting down one day at lunch. We were on vacation with another family, and one of the kids turned around, and I told him he'd heard me tell the story once before at home, the dragon's treasure. And I started to tell the kids at the table the dragon's treasure, and soon the kids at the table beside us and then beside them started to conjure around. So I ended up with about 30 or 40 kids sort of sitting around and sort of telling one story after the other. And what you realize is that you had this sort of captivated interest in learning and hearing good messages and hearing what you have to say, which sort of inspired me to sort of scale up what I was doing. Yeah. And the Dragon's Treasure actually was a story that I told my son when I was trying to teach him early on how to say please and thank you and how to count to 10. And you don't get ice cream unless you finish your dinner. So if you actually read the story, the very simple things are in there. Yeah. But I wanted to create a story that, talked about courage and helping others. And the interesting twist in that story is that in the book, for my mother's 80th, I wanted to give her a special gift. And actually in the story, the images of the king and the queen are actually my mother and my father. And the lady of the court and the cardinal are my in-laws.
It must be so fun.
And it's the only time in their lives where we actually had all grandparents and the 3 kids in the picture, because you could do it in a book, not in a photo, because they weren't here.
It must be so fun for your family to see you weave them through the various stories that you've told. If there's one thing that families need today, I think it's time together. And your books certainly provide that with an opportunity to discuss beyond the message in the book. That's part of your intention, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. And there's actually a book that's called A Compass for Kids, which is almost like a teaching guide. And the idea here is to sit down. I'm a big believer in sitting down with a kid and reading a book, a picture book, and using it to sort of talk about the messages and the fundamentals and the values that are in the book, and ask them questions. What happens if you see somebody bullying you or somebody else? What should you do? And use it as an educational tool to teach our kids, because a lot of books are nice, but they don't have an opportunity to teach your children.
Yeah. I've had the privilege of reading 3 of your books, and each one is illustrated by a different illustrator. But I'm glad you mentioned the picture books, because that is part of what draws you into these. They're beautifully done. Tell us a little bit about the story of the seamstress and the prince and what it taught your daughters.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's sort of a twist on the classic princess falling for the prince story. And I wanted to teach my daughters and kids that, look, you can have disabilities, you can have handicaps, but they shouldn't hold you down. And in the story, she has to, with the help of the animals in the forest, she wins the heart of the prince, but she's afraid the prince won't love her because she has this artificial leg. She has this disability. But the prince ultimately loves her for who she is. But what's interesting in the story at the end is, because she is such a strong character and so brave and courageous, the king makes her the general of the armies, and the prince becomes a stay-at-home dad. What I was trying to teach my daughters is that, girl power goes a long way. You can do great things. There is no stereotype for jobs or roles or careers or opportunity, and that the world is your oyster. And the idea here was to really teach them that message through the story, that you can be different, but there's no reason you should be held back. You can be the best you can be.
So you've written 12 books at this point. What's the future for you as a writer of children's books?
Great question. I've got 2 more coming. What I'd like to do is create a publishing house that takes on books that teaches educational messages to kids, Christian values, and that sort of my label becomes associated with sort of teaching kids. As part of that, I'm actually working now on 2 trivia games, which are really very educational for kids, because I think kids love trivia, they love stories, but I want to sort of encompass that around Christian values and morality and education for kids, and sort of create something bigger and better.
You're a busy man. I just want to say I've read The Seamstress and the Prince, The Dragon's Treasure, and Ellie the Eagle, and they're all great. I want to say that these are just 3 of the storybooks in Paul Collins' collection. They're available wherever books are sold. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today. Gordon?
Thank you for your time. Thank you.